This is All Out Politics, news, debate and opinion. Today, from the heart of the European Union, we are live from the European Parliament studios here in Brussels. So, with EU leaders moving on to talk about Asia today, has anything actually been achieved on Brexit? Theresa May's offer to lengthen the UK's transition period hasn't gone down very well at home with her own MPs on both sides of the Brexit divide. But are there any signs that the mood music in Europe might actually be changing, with one senior diplomat saying a coalition of the reasonable is forming to help avoid a no-deal Brexit? Well, joining me now are four MEPs from the Conservatives, their Deputy Chief Whip here, John Proctor, Labour's European Parliament, Richard Corbett, the Independent MEP Stephen Wolfe, formerly of UKIP, and the Green Party's Brexit spokesperson Molly Scott-Cato. Welcome to you all. You watch these things closely. It is your job. Molly Scott-Cato, where do you think we are on Britain leaving the European Union?
Well, it's quite difficult for us all to tell the difference between the theatrics and the reality, but I think we're seeing the negotiations increasingly run into the sand, and this was kind of inevitable because people were sold something back in the referendum which was always going to be impossible. So we an afternoon as people were promised, and that's why people like me are going to be marching on Saturday to say we actually have to...
This is the People's Vote March in London.
Absolutely, I think it's a democratic necessity now. What we're getting at the end of the deal looks nothing like what people promised in June 2016, and democracy requires that we get to vote on what Brexit actually means rather than what people were promised.
So, Stephen Wolfe, Brexit's breaking down and could be stopped by a people's vote.
I don't think it's necessarily be stopped by the people's vote. What I think we're seeing now, actually, is the Brexit is becoming a bleeding to death slowly, and what we're going to end up is a grey and lifeless corpse of independence, where we're going to be dragged on and on and on, waiting to hear whether we actually get to leave. I mean, it was interesting last night that some of the journalists saying you must be delighted that at least you know that you're going to be leaving these institutions behind, the council, the... But in reality, is, as one of the advocates for Brexit, who I say in the civil service, this is a Twix or a Kit Kat type of Brexit. Underneath are layer and layer of agreements which will tie us in ad infinitum.
What do you think?
I think my colleagues should probably join the doom and gloom party. That's not what I've seen here this week at all. There's a real positive attitude. There's a real different approach within the council, and you need to look at this Parliament's chief negotiator, Guy Verhofstadt, and what he's had to say this week, which is he's sure a deal will be achieved. The Prime Minister of Luxembourg also saying that actually a bad deal for the UK would be...
But is that actually because, you know, we're not fully leaving, we're sort of going to be still attacked?
We are fully leaving. There's absolutely no doubt about that whatsoever. We need to get on, get the last 10% sorted out, get the fine detail agreed, and then we'll have a deal.
Richard Corbett, what do you think?
There probably will be eventually a deal. They've missed the October deadline. The November summit has been cancelled. They're looking at sorting it out in December, probably then only appearing in January. The problem is it'll be a bad deal, bad for Britain, a job-destroying Brexit, a rights-threatening Brexit, a Brexit that bears no resemblance to the promises that were made by the Leave campaign and by Brexit ministers when they started the negotiations.
Because if there's a transition, if the transition is a bit longer, that's pretty close to what Keir Starmer and Labour want as the permanent state,
in any case, you would need a transition, and 21 months...
But he wouldn't get it if there was no deal.
Yes, but we were talking about the probability of a deal, but it'll be a bad deal because it will be eventually leading us out of the customs union, cutting us off from our main export market, making supply chains across the border much more difficult, threatening our manufacturing, threatening our agriculture, threatening thousands of jobs in Britain. And that's why public opinion has not rallied behind the referendum result in the way that everybody expected. It's shifting in the other direction.
So there's no one here who thinks that no deal is reality, is that right?
No deal will ever happen. Certainly those MEPs here and those civil servants behind the scene I've been speaking to this week believe that there is no way UK government to ever exercise no deal, and that is why they're quite comfortable to sit back in the position that they have now and allow these negotiations
to have a deal, you need
extend.
Theresa May
They'll
to
never
face
allow a no
down.
deal.
To have a deal, you need Theresa May to face down one side or another in her party, and she's
this is some
unable
kind
to do
of
it.
bizarre conspiracy theory from an ex-UKIP person who couldn't even stay with his own party. This is the shambles of what the Leave campaign persuaded people to vote for. They didn't have a plan, there was no particular prospectus, and now they're saying that somehow civil servants are deliberately destroying the country. I mean, it's absolutely absurd. It shows the kind of nonsense that the Leave campaign came up with.
Richard Dearlove, who was the ex-head of
I don't
MI6...
think Richard Dearlove would agree with you in a million years.
He said very clearly in his letter that the civil servants are the ones behind this and putting us at risk, particularly in our armed forces and our security.
So you think, Molly Scott-Cato, you think there is a risk there could be no deal still?
The problem is that there's such a mess at Westminster, it's going to be so difficult to get our MPs to agree to anything that we may reach the deadline, and there's this kind of false idea that somehow all EU negotiations go down to the wire and this is like that. This is not a negotiation, it's a series of options, and we have to choose one of those, and then it has to come to us in the Parliament, and we need to scrutinise it properly. We're not just a rubber stamping operation. So if this is not agreed fairly soon, then we simply may have no deal by accident. That's the problem I'm worried about.
There is a risk in that regard. Clearly, timing is crucial. We should be optimistic today. Things have moved on at a pace at this summit, and that's really good news for everybody in the UK. This idea that everyone's the UK is holding their head in their hands just isn't the case.
They really are.
We go away from here positive from this summit. Things could come forward and could be resolved before December. In actual fact, let's just wait and see. But what we can take away is that there will be a deal. The UK will get a good deal, and it'll be a good deal.
Well, Labour's saying it's going to vote down a deal in the House.
There may well be. There'll probably indeed be a deal that will then be rejected by the House of Commons because it will be a bad deal, and because different parts of your party will peel off and vote against it.
That's actually very interesting. That's going to be up to Labour to see if they're going to put the national interest first.
We will indeed
the
put
national interest first, or if they're going to play party politics with this issue. The deal that we put before Parliament will not be bad for Britain.
The really important thing is that we don't end up with this false dichotomy that the Prime Minister's trying to create, where it's a bad deal or no deal. The British people have to have the chance to vote for a good deal, and if they decide that the majority is for Remain, then we have to have that option on the table.
Well, what she's saying, or what Dominic Raab appeared to be saying, is that there will be a clean-cut vote, which will be either accept this deal or we don't. What then happens, of course, is going to be in the gift of Parliament.
Well, that's totally unacceptable, because it was all about taking back control. It was all about Parliament taking back control. It's not taking back control, because Dominic Raab is limiting the options, so we can only have your bad deal or no deal at all. No, we have to have an amendable motion so that the MPs...
on the yes, no to the deal, but before that there will be a resolution which will say we want more clarity on this, we want a commitment on that, and maybe we want renegotiation.
We never got
bit.
such clarities in 1975. We never got such clarity over the Lisbon Treaty. We never got such clarity over the Maastricht Treaty. The whole point about this is we never went out to a vote for a referendum saying this is what would happen,
or the rest.
We
never ratified an international treaty by means of a referendum.
We never got a deal to say that we would continue to a political union when we were sold the idea that it was all about economics in 1975. And this is the lie that the Remainers put out every time about democracy. What you're seeking to do is ensure that Brexit never happens because you lost the vote. It's filled with people who just cannot accept that masses of people in this country ignored your view.
But if you
that is why they want to move on.
If you believe so strongly...
The essence of democracy is have a vote, carry it out.
No, it's also...
And then if you don't like...
But isn't that what Mrs May's doing and you're attacking her for?
And you have a right
because I don't believe that what we're going to get is the Brexit that we want. What we want,
it's funny that the people who most strongly argue that
stay in the EU. If you're carrying on accepting the customs union rules of the European Union, read it in whatever language you are, you have effectively stayed in.
It's funny, isn't it, that the people who most loudly say we must respect the will of the people don't want to check whether that still is the will of the people. They're afraid of the shift in opinion polls. They're afraid that people would not want to back this bad Brexit that is emerging.
So will you be marching for the people's vote?
Oh, it's not whether I'll be there, certainly.
You will be. You're on the march tomorrow.
Thousands of people from all walks of life from across the whole country, even from Orkney and Shetland, coming down for it.
What do you think about people's vote?
That's not Labour Party policy, though, is it? The Labour Party policy isn't to have a people's vote, and that's what we see. That's what we see with Labour. They're all over the place. There's one serious politician in all of this game, and that's Theresa May, who came here this week against all of the odds from all of the commentators, and actually has pulled off almost.
Well, you may be a loyalist, but why aren't the Tories at Westminster? Because we've got, you know, a whole range, all the way from Nicky Morgan and Johnny Mercer on the Remain side, all the way through to Jacob Rees-Mogg on the others, with Nick Boles in the middle, all saying, we don't support the Prime Minister, we've got a better idea.
I don't know that in those simple
well,
at all, Adam.
Look,
many of those names you've quoted are friends of mine. When it actually comes down to the wire.
But aren't you frustrated when you hear what they're saying?
When it comes down to the wire, it'll all be about is who votes for what, and I am confident that Conservative members of Parliament will vote for the Prime Minister's deal.
OK, how much of a problem is this Irish backstop, Irish border issue, do you think?
I think it's a confected problem, particularly when you talk about the no deal. You've had Varadkar talk to in his own parliament over here saying that in a circumstance of no deal, there would be no hard border. You've had Juncker go over to Ireland in their own parliament and say that if there was a no deal, there would be no hard border. Theresa May said there would be no hard border. So the fact that there would be no hard border on a no deal scenario therefore means that the whole scenario is confected to delay, obfuscate and eventually deny the Brexit that most of us wanted.
You agree with that?
Not at all. If the government is determined to turn that into a customs border by leaving the customs union, how do you have a customs border without customs checks?
Well, there have been various proposals put forward by the European Research Group and others.
There's been several proposals, but both sides have agreed they should not be on the land border. What's the alternative to that? Down the Irish Sea? The DUP says no. Keep the whole of the UK in the customs union? The right wing of the Conservative Party says no. So Theresa May is stuck between these different constraints. She can't face down either wing of her party, and therefore she's not been able to move on this issue.
What would Labour do? Would you be OK with a
we would
border
stay in the
down the
customs
Irish
union.
Sea?
We would stay in the customs union, the whole of the UK. It's vital for our economy anyway, not just for the Northern Ireland border.
I think we're hearing Labour Party policy set here in Brussels by Richard today. Much of this is news to us. Is news to us.
Well, they talk about a customs union, not the
customs union. Sorry, a customs union, the customs union. We're dancing on the head of a pin, aren't we?
You are indeed.
At the end of the day, no one has seriously come up with other workable, feasible alternatives between the north and the south.
Have the Green Party got the answer?
I think it's terribly irresponsible to see this crucially important issue of peace in Northern Ireland used like a political football like this. And the Prime Minister has set up these red lines, as Richard pointed out, which makes it impossible to resolve the situation of Northern Ireland. She, despite you being called the Conservative and Unionist Party, she has put the Union at risk here. And the most important thing here in Brussels is to preserve peace in the island of Ireland, as I'm sure many of the Irish MEPs who we work with are telling you very clearly. And the current proposal from the British government doesn't do that.
The whole point is the Prime Minister is protecting the Union. That's the whole issue that we're facing. She's very, very clear that there will be no hard border between the north, between the north and the south. And the whole point of having an implementation phase is so that the UK can negotiate a comprehensive free trade agreement with the European Union, thereby not requiring such a border.
Is it fair to say what business is this of the EU anyway? I mean, it's all about the United Kingdom.
Absolutely not, because Ireland continues to be a member of the EU, and that's why, as a member of the EU, you have a very strong place, and that's what we're seeing. If we're leaving, we're losing that protection of many member states. The other 26 stick with Ireland in this. But we're losing that kind of support.
It is surely unacceptable for the EU to come up with proposals which could mean a border within the United Kingdom.
All the EU's done is
the
protected the single market.
by leaving and leaving the customs union that is creating this problem. If you leave the customs union, you're creating a customs border, aren't you?
But that's like saying you have a divorce, you leave your wife, and you allow your wife then to determine who can enter your house thereafter, who can actually come and sleep on your side of the bed thereafter.
Absolute nonsense. What a silly analogy.
The analogy is very clear. When you have a divorce, you actually then become independently minded of what you tend to do. And if you want to have a decision of having a border and border checks, it's down to Ireland and the EU whether they want to implement that.
And you need to sort out who has keys to the house and who can
Well, then you're bringing in my analogy. What you're simply trying to say is allow Ireland and the EU to have keys to the Union of the United Kingdom.
International relations is much more complicated than human relationships, and it's because of these silly false analogies and the way you've simplified this discussion from the start that we've got into this mess that we have. Let's be grown up. Let's take the issue of the Northern Ireland border and peace in Ireland seriously.
Sniping from the sides, criticising unnecessarily, and trying to take even this kind of intellectual language that this is too complicated for the common person because it's international relationships. Thus, same argument that you put in that people were stupid and thick to be able to vote to leave. And that is exactly what Remainers have said consistently.
No.
Only you have said that.
So yes or no, is there going to be a deal agreed here which gets through the Westminster Parliament?
Yes.
There'll be a bad deal and it won't get through Parliament.
It'll be rejected by the British Parliament because it's bad for Britain.
There will be some form of deal.
OK, thank you all very much indeed for that very frank discussion.